It's already 5 p.m. by our time in Nigeria. So I say good evening to our distinguished guest speaker and other participants at this PEEF virtual talk. And good morning, I should say, to our distinguished participant from the US, Alhaji Moshood.
Thank you very much. God bless you.
You're welcome, sir. I will be introducing the guest speaker later. Meanwhile, you are all welcome. My name is Dr. Musa Rabiu, the Executive Secretary of PEEF, People Expertise and Excellence Foundation, and I'm going to be the moderator for this exciting session. PEEF focuses on the improvement of human capital development and for better governance in Nigeria and Africa at large. We introduced the PEEF virtual talk a few years back. We have had several sessions now of the economy, and this year we have had 3 sessions already. And the focus has been on the steel sector, the Ajokota Steel Company. The second session was on the food security or lack of it. And the last session was on security in the country, national security in the country. So today we are focusing on the federal government expenditure plan, how far so far. And our distinguished guests will be doing justice to that. It is important to know that this is the first full year budget of the President Bola Tinubu administration renewed hope agenda. So it's important that we take a look at how far the expenditure plan has been implemented. And I'm very confident that our distinguished guest speaker will do justice to the topic. I'd just like to also highlight that the Tinubu administration has a 7-point renewed hope agenda covering the economic growth, security, infrastructure development, social development, power, energy, food security, and wealth creation. These are all laudable, agenda items for our national development. It is important to then see how far these agenda items have been covered in this first half of the year. The budget itself, 2024 federal government budget, it's a very ambitious one, as we are going to learn from our guest speaker. It's a budget of renewed hope, focusing on key APC agenda items. Total expenditure of 27.5 trillion naira. It's the largest in the last few years, and an estimated revenue of 18.32 trillion naira. Interestingly, the deficit, 9.18 trillion, is about 33.4% of total expenditure. 6 areas to look at, which we are going to hear more from the guest speaker, is debt servicing, which is about 30% of the allocated expenditure. It's a huge amount. Education sector, an important sector for our national development, particularly for human capital development, is 2.18 trillion naira, 7.9% of the total expenditure. Health sector, 1.33 trillion, 5% of the planned expenditure. Infrastructural development, 1.32 trillion, about 5% of the expenditure. Defense, 3.25 trillion, 12% of the expenditure. And finally, social development, 534 billion naira. So this will be hearing more from our guest speaker. It's important to also note that the federal government aims to increase the revenue to GDP ratio from 10% to 18%. So these are all ambitious, objectives that the President Tinubu, Bola Tinubu administration has set for itself. We hope some progress has been made. In the course of the session, we're going to hear about that. Now to our guest speaker. Our distinguished guest speaker, Professor Muhammad Sagagi, is a distinguished economist, a development consultant, the former vice chairman of the Presidential Economic Advisory Council under President Muhammadu Buhari administration. Professor Sagagi holds a PhD in economics from the University of Warwick, the UK, focusing on commercial policy and industrialization in Nigeria. He has extensive experience in economic development, entrepreneurship, and strategic policy management. Previously, he advised on various DFID-funded programs aimed at skills development, poverty reduction in northern Nigeria. So as you can see, our distinguished guest speaker is a very, very experienced, a subject matter expert to handle the topic for this session. So what are the expectations from the participants in this session? Clearly, we'll get analysis that will provide clarity on the topical areas and recommendations on the following items. 1, percentage of actual spending, CapEx versus overhead or operating expenditure by mid-year. 2, impact on job creation and poverty reduction. So how far have we gone at the federal level in this area? The third area will be, so budget deficits, it's clear. What have we done so far? And what is the GDP ratio in terms of the deficit GDP ratio? And finally, inflation. We're experiencing galloping inflation, particularly food price inflation. So what is the latest observation by our guest speaker? So these are the areas we expect, and many more that Professor Muhammad Sagagi will provide insight for us and educate us. In terms of time management, this is a 1-hour session. So we are spending 10 minutes to introduce the topic, and we're about to conclude that now. The guest speaker will have 30 minutes to present. Q&A and interaction with the participants will take about 15 minutes, and we encourage everybody to please be ready, take notes, and write questions or make your comments. We'll allow time for that later on. And we'll spend 5 minutes to conclude the session. So that is the outline. I will please suggest that you mute your mic during the session until we get to the Q&A so that we wouldn't have any interruptions. And you can also use the chat box to post questions or comments. We'll also pick them from there. So that is it. So once again, you are all welcome to this session, exciting session on the review of the 2024 Federal Government of Nigeria Expenditure Plan. And please join me to welcome, to present to us now, Professor Muhammad Sagagi. You're welcome, sir. You can put on your video, and you are a co-speaker, so you can also share your screen by, if you click on share screen, you can then share your presentation.
Good evening, all. I'm sorry, I can hardly hear you. I could, you are very faint. Perhaps can.
Okay.
I hope it's.
am I having the same challenge with all the other participants? Hello?
No, I can hear you very well, sir.
Okay, you can hear me now. Can you hear me? Can you all hear me?
Yeah, we can hear. I can hear you from US. Thank you.
Oh, excellent, excellent. So good evening.
Can hear you.
Good evening, everyone. I thank you
Yes.
for
Please,
giving
could you
me
put
this
on-
opportunity
please put
to
on your
speak
video
on,
so that we can see you, please, Prof.
for the opportunity to speak on the budget, on the spending plan of the federal government in 2024. Let me share.
Yeah,
Let me
okay,
share the
Prof,
slides.
could you click on your video so that we can see you, and then we'll pin.
Yes, let me share the slide first.
Okay.
Um, Can you see the screen now?
Yes, please.
Can you see the screen now?
Yes, we can. Could you put
Yes, we
it on
can.
slideshow? Yes, we can see it.
Sorry?
Put it on slideshow so that we can see it, but you can also click on the slideshow,
Sorry, I
item
can
there.
hardly hear you.
Oh dear. We can see your screen. Can you hear me? You can see your
I can
screen.
hardly hear you, but can you see the slide I'm sharing?
Yes.
Okay.
We can
Right.
see your slide, but he's advising that you put it on slideshow, sir. Thank you.
Yes, I will. I just wanted to just make sure that it's there. Yeah. Is it good enough now?
Perfect.
Perfect.
Yes.
Thank you. Okay, so
Your video.
so let me begin by a reminder of the president's speech.
Yeah, Prof, could you put on your video? We want to see your face as well, please.
Okay, I will show my face.
Mm.
Sorry, just a minute, please.
No problem.
I'm having difficulty sharing this. So just bear with me just a moment, please. Can you see my face now? It's a little dark here.
Yeah. No, it's okay, Prof. It's
You can see
okay.
my face now.
Yeah, very good. Well done.
Yes. Okay, so I think if the moderator can adjust his mic, I don't understand why I can't hear you, but I can hear others who
Okay.
spoke.
All right, let me work on that.
Okay.
I will be speaking now. You will be speaking for the next 30 minutes. So please go ahead.
Oh, God. So good evening. Let me just begin again with this speech by by Mr. President. The pledge to remodel the Nigeria's economy for growth, for job creation, for food security, and for an end to extreme poverty. This was his inaugural speech, part of the inaugural speech on May 2023. And so the question I want to ask is whether this budget of 2024, which is the first full year budget of Mr. President, whether it is part of that remodeling strategy, and therefore whether it is capable of promoting growth, of creating jobs, reducing poverty, and so on and so forth, the same objectives that he had set. So I'm going to do this presentation in 4 buckets. There are four compartments. The first one is to be able to look at the budget itself, look at the parameters of the budget. That is going to be short. I know that we are all aware, we know what all those parameters are. The second one is to look fundamentally at the policy environment, because that is what will dictate whether we are able to implement the budget as originally intended. And we ask a simple question: has the environment been friendly, hostile, or neutral? Then the third compartment, the third bucket, would be to examine the impact of the policy environment on the budget. Is the policy environment facilitating the implementation of the budget, or is it hindering implementation of the budget? And then obviously it is important for us to identify how we can make the budget better, the spending plan better. So I'll make three important general statements. The first statement I would make is that this budget is perhaps the most audacious in a decade. Audacious in the sense that the government or Mr. President was willing to take bold risks. This is the first one. The second general statement I will make is that this budget is not in sync with the fiscal realities of the government, of this country. And this is related to the first one, because it's not uncommon, it's not unusual for politicians to take those risks by setting ambitious targets, even when resources are not available to implement those interventions. And the third general statement I will make is that this budget is also not in sync with the reform agenda of the government. There is too much government in this budget, whereas the reform agenda focuses on market-based solutions. So let me take the first one. Why is this budget audacious? Why is it risky? What parameters, do we consider to make that kind of statement? Let me jump to this this slide. This budget is bigger than 4 government budgets combined of 1999, 1920, 1999, 1920, 2000, 2021, and 2022. The combined, this budget combined were about 26 trillion. This budget for 2024 is 28 trillion. So this is huge. The second reason why we think it's audacious is the assumptions regarding the revenue that the government would collect for the implementation of the budget. There's an assumption that aggregate revenue would increase by 66% relative to 2023. Now, it is ambitious because a 10-year average that we considered was 22. The 10-year average, increase in revenue was 22%. That's between 2015 and 2024. But the most audacious, the most risky assumption made was that government would increase oil revenue by 247% relative to 2023. And this is audacious if you consider that a 10-year average increase was only 52%. Okay, so particularly with regards to the revenue projections, the projected change in oil revenue, 247, projected change in aggregate revenue between 2023 and 2024, 66%. A reduction in deficit from 13 trillion in 2023 to 9 trillion. The 10-year average was about 4 trillion. So this is also ambitious. Non-oil revenue to increase from 8.7 trillion to 10.3 trillion. So looking at all this, that is good to be ambitious, but it's also good to be realistic, to put your budget in sync with the fiscal realities. Now, this may not be a criticism of that, but it's for us to bear in mind what this budget is all about. So you ask a number of questions. Is this spending plan being implemented the way it was originally intended? Are we reaping the benefits of his audacity, of the audacity of the president, of his willingness to take risks in enacting this budget? If the answer is yes, the question is this budget stimulating the economy? And I think this is what the moderator also asked. Are we creating jobs? Are we lifting poor out of the poverty? On the other hand, we may also want to ask if Mr. President is actually paying a price. He's paying a price for the audacity to have these risky assumptions. And, and if that is true, what actually is threatening the implementation of the investment plan? So for us to do that, I'll commence by looking at the policy environment since 2024. What has the policy environment looked like? Like I said at the beginning, is the policy environment friendly? Is the policy environment, is it hostile? Is it neutral? Does it facilitate the smooth operation, the smooth implementation of this budget? And we identified about 12 disturbing signals, events that may make it extremely difficult to implement the budget as intended. The first one, of course, is the foreign exchange market. And by the way, I would just remind us that most of the data that we have is between 1st January, when the budget was unveiled, and the end of the first quarter, which is end of March and early April. Sometimes we have data up to June. So a lot of the information that we have will be related to the first quarter of that. So the first signal that we have, the policy environment, is the changes in the exchange rate. I think between January and March, and even before January, it was on a roller coaster. The exchange rate had fluctuated from 907 pre-budget to about 1,800, 1,900 naira to the dollar around February and March, before it settled at about 1,500 in June. But before we achieved some stability in May and June, it was indeed on a roller coaster. That is one. The second one is to ask ourselves whether the subsidy regime is back, or, as the government initially claimed, the subsidy regime is gone. What I did on the screen is to produce evidence that indeed the government is still paying subsidy on PMS consumption. What we don't know is how much is being paid as subsidy for petroleum consumption. And I have captured a number of scenarios. The government admits to paying about between 5.4 trillion. The estimated subsidy is going to be about 5.4 trillion in 2024, against what was paid in 2003, about 3.6 trillion. The IMF suggests something like 8.4 trillion projection, or $5.9 billion. That will be about 50% of the projected revenue of the budget. Bank of Asia projected about 7 to 10 billion dollars. You can translate that either using 800 naira to the dollar or the current rate of about 1,500. Daily Trust, quoted the IMF as confirming that, the subsidy is back. There are suggestions that it's about 1 trillion monthly payments. There are also suggestions. So what cannot be disputed is that, government is still paying subsidy on PMS consumption. So this is the second signal that we get from the policy environment. The third one is that whether or not subsidy payments are made, the fuel queues are back. In some places, the queues lasted a month or more in this first quarter of the year. The fourth one is that the stabilization agenda is expanding beyond the removal of subsidy on petroleum consumption, beyond the flotation of the domestic currency. The third, I think, major policy pronouncement is the reflective tariffs on electricity. This was raised from 250%, from 206, from 68 per kilowatt to about 206. I think it's now about 226 naira per kilowatt. And the fourth one is CBN's, the Central Bank of Nigeria's bullish monetary policy. From December 2023 to May 2024, we have jacked up the MPR, the policy rate, from 18.75% to 26.25%. Now, the last meeting moderated the increase by only considering about 50%, 50 basis points. But, from December 2023 to, May 2024, it had increased by that much. The sixth one, the increase in headline inflation. December 2023, it was, food inflation was about 34%. By May, it was about 40.66%. Again, the latest release from the, from NBS shows, further increases, both in food inflation and in headline inflation. Headline inflation is now I think in excess of 35%. Food inflation is in excess of 42%. The seventh signal from the policy environment is that although we have an oil price above the benchmark, oil prices have gone beyond above $80, but oil production had actually been below the projected 1.78 million barrels a day. Now, if we estimate between 1st January, when the budget was unveiled, between that and the end of the first quarter, there was an estimated loss of between 40 and 42 million barrels of crude oil, a total loss in production as a result of the inability to meet the production target. The eighth one is on capital flows. We have had some progress in capital flows up to about $3.4 billion by the end of the first quarter, flown into, capital flows into Nigeria. But we also have to remember that this is not all FDI, is foreign portfolio investment. Smart investors come in to take advantage of the hike in policy rates, and it's not really the kind of investment that Nigeria wishes to have. The ninth signal is the distribution of revenue to the 3 tiers of government. Now, let me remind us that when the subsidy was withdrawn, and also when we made adjustment in the exchange rate adjustment, the most trumpeted achievement of the government was that there was an auspicious fiscal space. The fiscal space has enlarged. And that, of course, is very significant because, the budget, the country had experienced fiscal constraint for a long time. And therefore, it was very welcoming to see that, we have had some increase in the fiscal space. And so it increased between May and April 2024. It was up by about 91%, excellent. But if you consider between December 2023 and April 2024, it was only an increase of by 15%. And then it was down 10% between January and April 2024. And there are reasons for that. A lot of the increase that we have experienced, to do with the exchange rate gain rather than withdrawal of subsidy. And by the time the currency stabilized, the exchange rate stabilized, it was not, the increases would moderate. The 10th signal is the increase in deficit. And this is what also the moderator had made, reference to earlier on. What we have seen is that the budget deficit had widened. As of July, when the Mr. President submitted the request for 6.2 trillion naira budget, the supplementary budget, that would push the budget deficit to about 14 trillion as of July. Now, this is higher than what was projected. The projected deficit was 9.18 trillion. And this is also higher than the deficit in 2023, which was, I think, 13.77 trillion. Now, the new deficit, it would be equivalent to about 6% of GDP. and about 49% of budget. Number 11, GDP growth as released by the NBS the growth rate has been rather small, obviously very disappointing and below expectations. In Q4 of 2023, the growth rate was 3.46%. In Q1, it dropped to 2.98%. All the projections by the World Bank, the IMF, and other organizations, all the projections point to less than the projected, which is 3.76%. And then between January, when the budget was unveiled, until June this year, we have had new projects and new programs introduced by the government. There's the National Construction and Household Support Program that will boost agricultural productivity to strengthen the economy, and so on and so forth. There are new construction projects, highways and railways that, when it was presented, it was not actually costed. But there's also extra provision for resources to cater for those that might have been adversely affected by the market-based reforms. 10 billion to states for the procurement of buses. I'm cautioning that of course put pressure on FX. There's about 555 billion grants to families in 36 states, and the FCT. There is 155 billion for the procurement of assorted foodstuff, and then 650 billion to provide lower cost short-term facilities to MSMEs and so on. So 11 events or 11 different signals in the policy environment that would obviously impact on the 2024 budget. I have avoided, discussing on each of the events or on each of the items that I have listed. I've avoided discussing, the likely consequence, because that will be the focus of the third portion of this. So this is a summary of the environment. An increase in total public debt from 97 trillion to 121 trillion. A decline in oil production between January and March, with a loss of approximately 42 million barrels of oil. A change in the exchange rate, from about 900 to about 1,600 as of March 2024. And remember, the budget assumption is 800 naira to the dollar. A decline in growth rates from 3.46% to 2.98%. And remember also what the projected growth rate is for the budget is 3.76%. Headline inflation from 28.92 in December 2023 to 33.95 in May 2024. Food inflation going up from 33 to 40. Increase in FAC, first an increase from 1.6 trillion in December to 2 trillion in January, then a decline by 10% to about 1.8 trillion. And then the NPR increased from 18.75 to 26.25. So the question is, will this kind of environment has it been friendly to, to facilitate the implementation of the budget as intended? And what are the consequences of this kind of environment? So there are two things, two broad conclusions that we can drive, or two broad
Can you hear me?
statements that we can make. First of all, the policy environment has certainly raised the risk to Nigeria's growth because there has
Prof, can you
been
hear me?
lower revenues, lower growth rates below the projections, and then an increase, a widening of the deficit, the revenue expenditure gaps. And the simple statement that we can make out of this is that there's a risk that the budget will not be implemented as originally intended. So what can we say from there? First of all, the environment has been unstable. It's clearly a very hostile policy environment, macroeconomic environment. And this is from the a survey conducted by MAN, and let me quote, that as a result of high and unstable exchange rate and prolonged FX foreign exchange scarcity, escalated cost of energy, unstable import duty rate, high cost of borrowing, and further rise in inflation. And this is what we have seen the major characteristics of the policy environment. The second one, as a result of that, risks have not abated. The economy will grow slower than projected. The World Bank projection is 3.3%. Remember, government projection is 3.76%. IMF, which was released only about 2 weeks ago, is at 3%. And PricewaterhouseCoopers is about 2.9%. There is this, famous, if you like, statement that Dangote made, that nobody can create jobs with an interest rate of 30%. Nobody can create jobs with that kind of, 30% interest rate. No growth would happen. And this is also supported by what MAN had said in their survey, and what other businesses have reported, whether small businesses or large businesses around the country. So first of all, a very hostile macroeconomic environment that would impact on the growth of the economy. And this is what has happened to the sectors. We have made a comparison between the quarter 2023 growth, which is pre-budget, pre-2024 budget, and then the budget of, the first quarter of 2024. What do we see? That the key sectors of the economy are either declining or growing slowly. That would include the oil sector, which compared to the growth in 2023 is, declining. In 2020, first quarter is 5.78%. First quarter 2023, it was 12.11%. Oil production had actually only marginally increased 1.55 million barrels per day to 1.57 million barrels per day, first quarter 2023 and first quarter 2024. Two sectors show some growth: manufacturing from 1.38% to 1.49% in the 2 quarters. But you can see all increase is very marginal. Finance and insurance, it has also shown some increase from 29.7, from approximately 30% to 31% in the first quarter. So the key sectors of the economy are either growing slowly or declining. And it's particularly instructive if you look at the rate of growth in agriculture, that is less than 1%. And consider the rate of growth of Nigeria's population, which is about 2.something%. The agricultural sector, of course, has been the domain of the poor also. About 58% of all male in agriculture are classified as poor. 37% of all females in agriculture are classified as poor. So you will question whether this, over this period, the government has been able to either create jobs or fight poverty, lift people out of, lift the poor out of poverty by looking at the growth centers. For instance, manufacturing is key to employment growth, job creation, employment growth. The MSM is also, but it's not growing. As you can see from the projections made by MAN, the manufacturing sector is actually declining rather than growing. The fourth one is that will give you an idea of the impact of the policy environment on the budget is the revenue projections. Now, if you consider revenues from oil, remember what the government said, an increase in revenues by 247% relative to 2023. Now, between January and March, we lost 42.4 million barrels. Now, at 80, that would be how much? That would be nearly, at $80 per barrel, that would be about $3.2 billion. And if you translate that into Naira, that would be nearly 6. My estimation is that we must have lost nearly 6 trillion Naira between January and March, just from the loss in production of oil. This is one. The second one is that we've seen that subsidy is back. We don't know exactly how much, but if you take even the lowest figure that is quoted, which is 907, or approximately 1 trillion Naira, that also would squeeze revenue and crowd out investments in health, in education, in agriculture, in sports, and so on and so forth. The third one would be the high interest cost on government debt. First of all, the debt has increased. And secondly, there is an increase in the interest rates that MPR, the rates that we pay on government debts. The fourth one is that if you have elevated inflationary pressures, that would mean two things. One, it will reduce the worth of the revenues that you collect, but it will also put pressure on your own expenditures. So the worth of the revenue is reduced, but then there is a pressure on expenditure, which means that the revenue expenditure gap would widen.
Okay,
So,
Prof, can you hear me?
yes.
Okay, if you can hear me, because we are looking at the time.
Okay, I'll round up. I'll round up
So that
now.
we allow for interaction with our.
Sure,
Okay, please
sure.
go ahead.
Okay, so the revenues, for those reasons, revenues have also decreased. The deficit has gone up, one, because all revenues are lower, and two, because of debt service. So for 5 or 6 reasons to show that the budget is not implemented as originally intended. How can we make it more credible? Number one, we have to end all the controversies surrounding the budget. Provide more clarity. Was there budget padding? Are you paying subsidy on PMS? You have to provide more clarity for the budget to be credible. I will jump all this. You have to enforce some more budget discipline. We have suggested perhaps that you have a more formal fiscal deficit reduction program that will last, say, a couple of years, maybe 5 years. And what happens is that while you continue with revenue mobilization, you must ensure that unnecessary expenditure is cut from that budget. You have to recalibrate the reform agenda. Like I said at the beginning, there is too much government in this budget. too much, I mean, the role of the government is like crowding out what the private sector is expected to do. The reform agenda is focused on market-based solutions. Unfortunately, the budget is focused on, more government doing more things rather than allowing the private sector to do. Thank you very much. I will allow for interactions. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you, excellent. Thank you, Professor Muhammad Sagagi, for this very enlightening, presentation. I'm sure our colleagues who have been listening carefully have some maybe points of observation, comments, or questions to make. This is the time for that. Please, you may indicate your intention by raising your electronic hand, or mute your mic, or you could type your comments in the chat. These are the options available. Yeah, okay, go ahead. Alhaji Moshood, please go ahead. Please
First
unmute.
of all, I want to thank Professor Mohammed for the beautiful presentation. Please, what I want to ask is, usually when we have PVT by, like this, we come up with recommendations to the government on the way forward.
Yeah.
So, number one, I would like to have clarity on lessons learned from his work, from professor's work, and what he recommends as a way forward to avoid similar experiences in future. That's number one. Number two, there are complaints, and it's very clear that the cost of governance in the country is very high. Is there anything we can say or recommend to the government what the government can do to bring the cost down? And finally, a senator recently published that we should have a part-time legislature. I think this is good if we can implement that. So what do you feel? I mean, what do you feel as a way forward? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Do I take all the questions and then I answer them later?
Okay, for now, since this is the only one we have, you may go ahead, please.
Okay, so I think I didn't get his first question on maybe I think the moderator is best placed to answer that question and what we are going to do with the recommendation put forward.
Okay, the question is, what are the lessons learned so far? You have identified the challenges in implementation. So in recommending the way forward, what would you suggest are the priority lessons we can share with the government, the authorities?
I think okay. So I think the first one, Mashhood, the first one I think is that we have to learn to do a budget that is realistic. I can understand that politicians make promises and set targets that they can actually not implement. So I think the first thing is that we do not have to make political budgets. Our budgets don't have to be, we don't have to do politically expedient budgets to be politically correct. I think the first recommendation is for us to be able to produce realistic budgets, and those are budgets that are in sync with our fiscal realities. I can understand that Mr. President had made promises, and by the time he started implementing his reform agenda, people saw, they ran into difficulties, and obviously the president would like to implement a budget that would impress Nigerians. The second, so this is a lesson, and we have learned this, we have seen this many years, before, that once you do that, at the end of the day, performance of the budget will be poor because you don't have the revenues to implement all those ambitious interventions that you have proposed. With regards to cost of governance, I think you are right that many Nigerians had expressed the hope that Mr. President would also, cut especially recurrent expenditure. I have always advocated for this, a balance, a deficit reduction program that would last between 4 and 5 years. And what does it involve? It involves putting a cap on certain types of expenditure. You cannot say there will be no recurrent expenditure. We can only talk about the judicious and responsible, spending on recurrent costs and personnel and so on. But this one will put a cap on unnecessary expenditure. So for instance, you say that my expenditure on X would not be more than 20% between now and 2027. The share of recurrent cost in total budget should not be more than 30% or 25% or whatever. So you put a cap either in the growth of the expenditure or in the share of expenditure in total budget. Now, that you do that while you are also, mobilizing domestic resources. The third recommendation is that you can have also non-debt what do you call it? You can non-debt. Sorry, let me get it right. You do not have to access whether domestic loans or foreign loans, but you can have you can put in place like the Infraco or I am trying to remember the name of the program that we put in place that for the implementation of critical expenditure, critical infrastructure, you can have PPPs, public-private initiatives, so that you don't have to take loans to implement, for the railways, for the roads, for power, for all those critical infrastructure that you do not have to go to the market and borrow and implement. You can simply have, public-private partnerships, and sometimes even the private sector can accept to implement, those projects, provided you have the necessary environment friendly enough for them to encourage private sector to participate. So 3 recommendations. First one, being cutting your coat upon making realistic budgets is very difficult in political dispensations. Number 2, implementing the deficit balancing act for over a period of 5 years. And then the third one, being able to, access, to finance your critical infrastructure using non-debt financing. I think, okay, I remember now, is what we call the Nigeria Investment and Growth Fund. Nigeria Growth, which is a non-debt financing instrument that the government can use in financing critical infrastructure. I think those are the things that we can easily recommend to the government for implementation.
Okay, thank you, Prof. And I'm sure you agree with the part-time sitting of the legislatures, which was the third point he asked you to.
Well, I think whether we accept the part-time sitting, I think that I don't want to get into that because this is not about economics. I think there are also political implications for that. I mean, from the economic point of view, even a part-time, it depends on the kind of the rules of the game. It depends on, it depends on,
Okay.
how you implement whatever suggestion that is made. But I think there is certainly there are certainly reasons for us to be able to have a second look at the political structure that we have. There are certainly reasons for that. Whether we can achieve that by simply having a part-time legislature or something more radical, I think that remains to be seen.
Okay, thank you very much, Prof. We are pressed for time, but I don't know if we can take one more comment or question. Please
Yeah.
indicate. Do we have anybody with a need to make comment or ask a question? Oh, all right. It seems there is none. Okay, so Prof, thank you so much. You have shared with us a lot. I think it will be difficult within the limited time to try to summarize, but the key takeaway we can immediately confirm is the fact that the audacious budget has been challenged by the environmental policy issues.
Yes.
And there's a need to do a realistic review of it rather than wait till the end of the year and make amends, even though for politicians it's difficult. If you say there is hope, renewed hope, you don't want to dash the hope. But we are also realistic that the inflation, food inflation, everybody feels it in this country. The headline inflation is also on the rise. So there's a need to do a realistic review of the expenditure plan for 2024.
That is an excellent summary. It's an
Yes,
excellent summary. Yes.
yes, indeed. And then, of course, prudential management of our resources, the lifestyle of our leaders should also match the austerity that is ongoing on right now. The final
Absolutely.
point is that I know you are a member or a fellow of the Nigerian Economic Society.
Yes, I am.
Is there anything that body is trying to do with the federal government through its own contacts so that there could be a realistic review of this expenditure plan?
Well, I think they have had contacts with the federal minister, with the coordinating minister of finance. They have had contacts with them. I don't know exactly if there are any proposals they have submitted for a review of that, but I know one other body that is making a lot of waves and making proposals is the NESG, the Nigeria Economic Summit Group. I think they have a lot of proposals emanating from them for a review of the budget. I don't know how far they have gone, but I know that there are those efforts. And I think NES also, and I think on individual basis also, there are a lot of suggestions, and I hope that, from our end here, PEEF will be able to, make some recommendations, not only from what we have presented today, but from other sources. If you look, the forum is always vibrant with lots of suggestions and proposals. And I think that we will be able to put those together and submit to the government.
Thank you very much, Prof.
Thank you very much.
We have really benefited from your wealth of knowledge and experience. And we will try to articulate a position paper to government, which is what we normally do. Now, what they do with it is something else, but we'll do our own bit.